welcome back to another episode of Insects for Fun. Today, we finally have another listener request. It's seriously been a minute. And this one comes from Gardener Plus, which is a new terrarium business. As a result, today we're focusing on all things terrariums. And we're going to look at the different types, what they're used for, how they started, and how to make them. So, let's get into it. Terrariums are inanimate objects that belong to the family. Okay, sorry for real this time. Terrariums are genuinely some of the coolest things we can do to bring nature into our homes or workspaces. And they don't have to be big. Plenty of people make some really micro terrariums. In schools, science teachers sometimes have students build mini terrariums using plastic soda bottles. I've also done this as a side project before to house crickets and moss. Apparently, terrariums made from jars or other small spaces are their own niche called gerariums. And if that isn't a spoiler for how many different names for different styles there are, then here's another hint. The word terrarium can be broken down into terra, or earth, and arium, meaning space. For example, aquarium is aqua and arium, which literally just means aquatic space. I think when people think of terrariums, they generally think of anything that has plants and animals. And for that reason, I'm going to talk about 4 different kinds of ariums that involve plants, animals, or both together. These would be terrariums, paludariums, vivariums, and ripariums. A terrarium is any container, either open or closed, used to house plants, animals, or a combination of the two. Something unique to them is that they have a soil base, and if they do include water, it's usually a shallow bowl or takes up a really small amount of space in the tank. These enclosures are perfect for terrestrial organisms, but we can then divide it even further by talking about open and closed terrariums. Closed ones are fully sealed at the top and are usually what we use to house animals that could escape or dry out without a secure lid. Open terrariums are as you'd expect, fully open on the top, and are generally used for plants or small animals that can't escape or climb up glass or plastic. Some open terrariums are made where the opening is on the side as opposed to the top, and these are usually designed for air plants or succulents. Alright, let's move on to paludariums. These are very similar to terrariums but include more water. Like at least 50% of the base is water, and they're used for aquatic and semi-aquatic forms of life. If the surface area of water is less than 50% of the tank, then the body of water inside should be deep enough to support free-swimming life, like tadpoles or frogs, which enjoy having a small bathtub. This kind of enclosure is great for animals which require water to breed or deposit eggs. And some paludariums are designed only as a place to breed animals. For example, let's say you have a species which breeds in the rainy season, when areas tend to be flooded. You simulate this by moving your animals from a terrarium into a paludarium during that season in real life. Okay, so now you have a good grasp on terrariums versus paludariums, but what is a vivarium? This is actually just a blanket term used for anything with living animals inside. For example, paludariums and terrariums don't necessarily have to be vivariums, but they often are, which leads us to ripariums. The etymology behind this word comes from the Latin word ripa, which means riverbank, shore, or bank. As you'd expect, these are similar to paludariums. However, there is one big difference. A riparium features little to no actual landmass. It's more like a planted aquarium, which features shallow sections where water from a river or creek would meet land. The plants used in these scapes are often marginal, which means they can live with their roots and base fully submerged underwater while having their foliage grow above. The best part about terrariums, ripariums, and any arium really, is that there is endless creativity with them. There's something fun and special about creating a mini world that mimics something we can't easily access from our homes. And it's even better when what we've created is well received and enjoyed by the life we made it for. I'm not advocating the abduction of wild animals, but rather making something for an animal that comes from a pet store or breeder. especially if that animal was in an otherwise boring or improper enclosure. Let's now pretend we're going to build one ourselves, specifically looking at the differences we might see in a terrarium and paludarium that were designed to replicate a forest canopy. First, we have to think about what it means to be in a canopy. Is there solid ground nearby? Probably not, because it's a canopy. So what do? Well, maybe we should include a lot of elevated branches in our tank, some air plants, tree ferns, really layer it so it resembles being up in the trees. Okay, so if we are turning this into a terrarium, we will indeed have a base layer of soil or pebbles, or whatever else we think would properly match the environment. It's unavoidable despite making a canopy biome because it's a tank, and they all have a bottom. If we wanted to convert this into a paludarium, we could either A, take out half the soil and pebbles, place a plastic divider, and then fill the other half with water, or make the entire base freshwater to mimic trees overhanging a river, pond, or lake. Many people also like to include small waterfalls in their tanks, where the water flows down into the base of the paludarium and pumps back up to keep the waterfall going. Some common types of terrariums include forest, desert, and rainforest. Meanwhile, the common types of paludariums are bogs, marshes, and rivers. But how did all this even come to be? It all started back in the 1800s when two individuals separately came across something fascinating while observing life in a jar. Let's start with the more famous person, Dr. Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward, who was a British naturalist during the time of the Industrial Revolution. He was passionate about plants specifically and had been trying to grow ferns in his garden. But the air pollution from nearby factories along with acid rain kept him from making any progress outdoors. So he did what anyone with a will and a way would do. He took them indoors and started planting and housing things within glass jars. The event that really set everything in motion was less to do with plants and more to do with insects though. You see, he had glass jars of chrysalids and cocoons to observe eclosions of moths and butterflies. However, in one of these jars, he noticed that a seed had actually germinated due to a buildup of condensation. Why was there condensation? Well, the insect inside had died and was decomposing. If you remember anything from our decomposer episode, the act of decomposition generates heat. So anyway, having discovered that plants can germinate in jars, he took it to the next level, which was to construct a larger sealed container with the help of a carpenter in which to grow ferns. And surprise, surprise, it worked. This happened in 1829, and his invention became known as the Wardian case, which revolutionized the transport of plants within the British Empire and then the world. What people often neglect, apparently, is that there was a dude who did this 10 years prior named Alan Alexander McConaughey. But because this Scottish lad never published his findings, the world instead was led to believe that Ward was the first. This case was incredibly useful for cross-continental travel, but it was also becoming very popular back in London as interior decorations. Well, with the upper-class Victorian women, that is. You see, these women had nothing but time and money to spend on their botany hobby. And let's be honest, they really couldn't do a whole lot else besides ladylike hobbies such as playing the piano or doing embroidery. And that is where we will end today's episode. Thank you as always for listening, and I hope you have found some inspiration in making your own or maybe even reinventing a terrarium or paludarium you already have. Make sure to subscribe, rate the show 5 stars, and go support the YouTube channel if not the Patreon. Thanks again for listening.